Welcome to the final webinar of our EQUIP project. My name is Loukkola. I work for the European University Association as the Director for Institutional Development. And it is my pleasure today to be facilitating this webinar. A few practicalities before I say anything more about what is going to happen in the next hour. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so those of you speaking, for instance, in the webinar may take that into account. The audience will be particularly perhaps interested in the fact that you can the webinar recording will be available online after this event, and it can be shared with everyone. So if some of your colleagues couldn't make it right now, they still have a chance to listen to it later on. That's the first practicality. The second practicality is that, as you may have already noticed, in the bottom corner of the screen there is a chat box, which I see that many of you are already using in order to say hello to everyone else and introduce yourself. But I would also like to encourage you to use it to propose questions for our speakers or comment on the things that our speakers are saying, so that we can use them in the next hour to feed into our conversation. And then next to the chat box, there are links to some of the key documents that we hope that we will manage to inspire you to have a look at after this event. So those are the real practicalities, and then I'll say a few words about what this webinar is supposed to discuss before I present our speakers of the event. So we are here in the context of an EQUIP project. It has been a project that key stakeholder organizations involved in quality assurance at European level have been carrying out right now for 2.5 years. For this kind of a project was born by the fact that many of us were also involved in drafting the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance that were adopted in 2015. And there was a feeling that as stakeholder organizations, having drafted the document, we should also work in collaboration with our members, which are typically universities, quality assurance agencies, or students and other higher education institutions. We should work together with them to see how we put the principles that are presented in the document in practice. And that's what we've been doing. And I recognize quite a few names, and I noticed that many of you have taken part in various activities that we have organized in the past years. They've been webinars, workshops, focus groups. We've also carried out a couple of small surveys. And now we've reached the point where we are ready to publish the results of all this work. And one of the PDFs you've got in the bottom corner of your screen shows a publication that looks more or less like this. And today we are going to discuss how we enhance the quality and how we make the policy into a practice in a digital manner. And that was basically my introduction to the topic of today. We've lined up a few speakers to discuss these matters, and they represent different stakeholder organizations who have to work on these matters in their daily life. Next to me is my colleague Anna Gover, who's been carrying out the study with me in the past year, and will shortly introduce some of the key ideas that we came up in the study. Then after that, we move to the student perspective, which we go to a different order. I thought we usually try to have the students first, but today we will do it in a little bit different way. We move to Norway, Øystein Lund, who is the director of the Department of Quality Assurance, and he will give us a sneak peek to what has been the discussion in Norway in terms of external quality assurance framework in the past few years, and actually Norway is one of the cases we are using in the publication as well. Then after that, we'll go to Eltjo Bazen, who will talk about the institutional responsibility for quality assurance. He is the senior advisor for quality assurance in the University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. And then, last but not least, we'll go to the student perspective. Christopher Bohlens, who is part of the ESU quality assurance student expert pool, will discuss a little bit about the student expectations towards the rest of us as quality assurance stakeholders. That's the plan. As said, please post questions, make comments in the chat box. I will be using them in between the presentations and in the end of the session. But Anna, let's start with the short presentation as to what is this publication and report about.
Yes, thank you, Tia. To start, the starting point of this study, of course, was the ESG 2015. But I think it's also fair to say that quality assurance, the other starting point is that quality assurance being one of the success stories of the Bologna process. It gave rise, of course, to the first version of the ESG. We've had the establishment of ECHA, which is the only legal body that's come out of the Bologna process. And now, 2.5 years ago, we had the ESG 2015. What's also, I think, important to note as the kind of background for all of this is that there is a huge diversity of approaches across the European higher education area, and these approaches are continuously changing. Now, I think that one of the questions we get asked a lot when we're talking about the ESG is, particularly when we're talking about the ESG 2015, is what has been the impact of this 2015 version? And the answer, I'm afraid, to that is really, it depends. There's no clear answer to that. What is clear is that a lot of systems are continuously changing, but it's very difficult to attribute those changes specifically to the ESG 2015. So I'm going to, as I say, not go into these themes that you see on the screen in too much detail, because the speakers after me will do that. However, what I want to do is to pick up on one or two of the kind of cross-cutting themes that came out of the activities that we did as part of the study. One of those, or perhaps to say beforehand, is that I think it's important to note, and this was discussed also yesterday in an event we had in Brussels to launch this publication, that there aren't really any surprises that have come up. The things that we're going to talk about will probably be very familiar to all of you, but it is nonetheless important to keep discussing these and to reflect on them all together, because that is part of what helps to build the trust between different actors in the QA system and across systems in the European higher education area. And trust is actually something that I will come back to right at the end of what I want to say. So, First of all, QA, it's important to note, is just one tool among many that are used to support the quality of higher education. There are many other things that are used to do this: performance agreements, different funding arrangements, benchmarking, for example. But what's really important is to find the synergies between these different tools and approaches in order not to risk duplication of work. QA is also increasingly expected to broaden its scope, and we see this already in the revised version of the ESG that includes a standard on student-centered learning. So QA is making its way into the classroom, and this does, however, raise the question, which is something that a question that I know my colleague Tia often raises in discussion about QA, is how far it's way to go. What should it be responsible for? And that we need to be careful to avoid risking that QA is seen as the answer to everything. Finally, in terms of the QA tools, the exact role of QA is linked to, on the one hand, the division of responsibilities between dictators in the system and also the institution, but also the role of QA is linked to the purpose of the QA system. So is it an enhancement approach, or is it more coming down on the side of accountability? Is there a program level external QA, or is it institutional approach? And as I said before, who does what in terms of that system? The activities that we did underlined one very positive thing, which that there is a general common understanding of quality assurance across the European higher education area. But it's also clear that there are going to be exceptions from different stakeholders. As part of the EQUIP project, we carried out a number of focus groups with different stakeholders. These were representatives of universities, of institutions offering professional higher education, students, quality assurance agencies, and academics. And it was clear from this that, as I say, although there's a common understanding, there are different stakeholder groups have different aims and needs when it comes to quality assurance. A couple of quick examples of this: student-centered learning, for example. Here it's clear that the focus is going to be on the students, but it's also important not to neglect the impact that this new standard has on academics. In that there is more of a for professional development and support for academics in meeting the expectations of student-centered learning. And this is reflected also in some amendments that were made to Standard 1.5, which is related to academic staff. Another area where we see quite some difference in terms of stakeholder perception is that of communication. And this was a topic which was discussed quite intensely in a lot of the focus groups because particularly when you talk about external QA reports, there are a lot of different needs and demands attached to these reports, and it's very difficult that they can fulfill all of these requirements. So one of the recommendations that we made is that agencies should be clear on what is the purpose of the QA reports. Who is the intended audience? Is it the public, so that they are there to provide public information? Is it to a decision-making authority so that an accreditation decision can be made? Is it the institution itself so that they know how they can improve and where the areas of weaknesses are? And many agencies, of course, are trying to cater for more than one of these needs, and that can be very, very difficult in terms of meeting the goals. What's clear is that stakeholder for not only developing this common understanding of QA, but also for fostering a quality culture. And you'll see when you look at the study that a lot of the recommendations that we make are related indeed to stakeholder collaboration. So communicating with each other when it comes to designing the QA system in the first place, and for helping to avoid bureaucracy. Finally, a couple of other kind of overarching themes that came out and that are developed a little bit further in the conclusion of the study, if you want to read more about them. The first is the gap between theory and reality. So what is hoped for, what is intended to happen on paper, on the policy, and then what actually happens in practice. We all know that there can be quite some differences here, and it's clear that there's quite some work still needed in order to bridge the gap between theory and reality. Also, with regards to the definition of QA and the expectations towards QA, these are changing, but it would be important to keep these realistic and understand what QA is responsible for and how far it can go. And finally, it was identified and talked about that there is a high level of interplay between three features of QA systems. So on the one, and the starting point, there's the level of trust in the system and in the institutions. There's also the maturity of the system. So how long has a country or an institution been implementing quality assurance? And then there's the self-confidence on the institutional level, how confident they feel about taking on their own responsibility for their own quality assurance. And these three aspects all are all interlinked, and they have an impact on each other. So if you change one, for example, if something happens that means that the level of trust in a QA or higher education system reduces or increases, then this has a knock-on effect on the other aspects related to the system. So I think that's very briefly some of the kind of highlights of the cross-cutting themes. As I said, there's a lot more on the specific topics in the study itself, and I think that some of the speakers that are coming up are going to cover that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for the very short overview. I think we have one question, and I can always thank Fiona for coming up with a tough one. There's been a lot of talk about the student-centered learning and how the quality assurance agencies should address this topic. And actually, in the report, there is a whole chapter on it. Anna, any conclusions as to how agencies should address this new standard?
Yes, thank you for the tough question. Conclusions would maybe be a strong word, but what I can say is that we did discuss with the agencies whether they had themselves a definition of student-centered learning, and in most cases they concluded that no. In their opinion, it's the responsibility of the institution to come up with what they understand by student-centered learning and how that should be translated into practice in their own institution. What's interesting is then when we spoke to the institutional representatives, very few of them were able to say that their institution had a concrete definition of student-centered learning. And this is maybe where the challenge lies. Student-centered learning encompasses a really wide range of aspects, and really nailing down what it is that means for your institution and how you're going to implement it can be very difficult. And unless the institution is clear on that, it's then very difficult for the quality assurance agency to be clear on what it is that they're looking at when they undertake an external review.
So yes, basically agencies throwing the ball to the institutions for a change. We also have the question is whether we are using the right word when talking about the maturity of the system. Is that the right term, or should we rather talk about the level of quality assurance?
Yes, tricky one. I think by maturity, yes, indeed, what we mean is how long has the system been in existence. But what I perhaps understand is the message behind your question is that just because we've had a system in place for a long time doesn't necessarily mean that that it's more mature in the sense that it's working well. So yes, I do take on board that comment.
Yes, it's about more the question of if there is a kind of time for a change or not in the system. And we should also talk about the system, understand the system as the higher education system, because it's not only the quality assurance system that impacts what we're doing in quality assurance. All right, but I'll leave it for now. Anna, thank you for the introduction, and then we go move to Øystein and try to get his microphone and video working, because we've asked him to talk about the latest developments in Norway, because they deal with quality culture, which is an interesting topic and was also tackled in this project. So, Øystein?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of this webinar and present some thoughts, both concerning the report itself, but also the context of the Norwegian way of doing quality assurance. The title was given, Diversity of External Context and Legal Frameworks, Quality Culture. I think that will be covered, but the main thing is that I will bring you into partly what happened since 2012 until 2017-18, when the whole system of external quality assurance in Norway. And I think one of the important things around understanding how a quality assurance system works also here in Norway is to understand the specificity of culture and also history in the country that the quality assurance system should work. And in Norway, we have a kind of a strong balance between two main things. It's autonomy for the institutions and a great degree of trust towards what the institutions are supposed to do, and we try not to intervene if it is not necessary, and we also give all the obligations to the institutions that they are the one to ensure and to enhance and to create quality in their study programs and in their institutions. But at the same time, in the Norwegian setting, that is balanced very much with order and control. So on one side, you can say that institutions have a lot of power when it comes to self-accreditation and so on. At the same time, they know that we as a quality assurance agency have the possibility of going in if necessary. Just shortly, when we ended up with a new system, these were the three main things that we do as activities in the external quality assurance. We do initial accreditation of institutions, and then some accreditation of study programs for institutions that do not have self-accreditation powers. And then we do external quality assurance for all institutions. That normally would be every 6th year. And then we have the possibility of doing supervision of all study programs accreditations and institutional accreditation, but that is based on strategical priorities and what we call knowledge-based, that someone will call risk-based approach in addition. But first, how is NOKUT involved in setting the framework for the external quality assurance? In this sense, I will just bring you shortly through the history. We started back in 2012, and then NOKUT took the initiative to request the ministry change the framework of the external quality assurance. And we gave some hints to what that should be, and also suggested at the same time that a white paper, ministerial paper, should be written concerning quality in education, and especially around quality culture. And then in the years up, the ministry follows up. NOKUT was consulted, and also many other stakeholders that the ministry approached directly. And then we did something that we thought were quite important. We prepared a document where we did not go into the legal stuff, but we tried to figure out what is important in order to have quality, not in the institution, but quality in the study programs. And that was a policy document that was written by NOKUT, but with very much processes together with different stakeholders. I will come back to that. And that gave kind of the basis for going on and asking, what should we have processes for? What's the rationale behind having quality assurance, and what should be the main areas that should have focus by the institutions and then by NOKUT? In 2015-16 became a new law and ministerial regulation, and NOKUT was heavily involved both in discussing with the ministry, but also giving more significant documents in order to prepare that process. And then NOKUT will adopt their regulation for requirements for all external quality assurance. We are the one giving the requirements. The ministry is giving the framework in somehow. And in the summer of 2016, this white paper that we called for came, Culture for Quality in Higher Education. And that was quite significantly for the higher education institutions and for us, that many things were addressed that were quite important to improve and to enhance quality in higher education, and also giving hints about what kind of financial structure that should follow this white paper. And then we did also all the guidelines for the quality processes following that. I think the two main documents that were important in this process, and also how we played in, was the policy document that we prepared before everything was settled, and then the white paper on culture for quality in higher education. You'll find those later in this presentation in the end, if you want to look at it, and then I gave you the in English version of all the documents. And then, how does NOKUT involve its stakeholders in the design and implementation of the quality assurance system? And in order to say that, I tried to make this little overview around the ministry. And I think here it is important to state that I think it is quite important to think that stakeholder involvement is something that has to be made fit for purpose for the different activities. Around the ministerial activities, there were quite many stakeholders. The parliament itself was involved, public consultation processes, international and national stakeholders. There was a reference group with international partners, and NOKUT itself was also involved. But when it comes to our process, then we had the first process was around this policy document, where you can see what kind of stakeholders were involved: directors' conference, students, unions, employers, organizations, but also involving the academic environment that knows something about educational research. Professors in educational research and also researchers were involved in that process. And then we also brought this specific policy document into the annual educational conference that NOKUT has every year. And then when it came to the more legal work, the requirements for external quality assurance, that's a bylaw, then we made up a reference group with representatives from different stakeholders to kind of outline what should be in the regulation. And then we had a consultation conference, public consultation processes, and that was more how it should be in a normal legal process. When we came to the guidelines for the external quality processes, we did workshops together with the institutions where what we wanted to make part of the guidelines were presented, and we had feedback, and we also worked in order to make that both to hit the target, but also to make sure that the institutions came up with their problems with the different guidelines and so on. In the implementation, we did a lot of pilot projects in order to make sure that we make these quality assurance activities fit for purpose. We had reference groups in every pilot, and we also had feedback from all those involved in the pilot projects. Something I also would say as a very important thing that we are now about to launch is a renewed student engagement initiative together with the students, where we see that stakeholders, when it comes to students, it is not only, we have a very good relationship to the student organizations of the country, but trying to get students at program level interested in quality assurance and make them take the responsibility also to be part of the student organizations is a very important thing. And we think that is important from year to year to try to find new ways of engaging students in quality assurance of their own programs. And then how do these aspects of stakeholder involvement contribute to creating a quality culture in Norway? In this, I think what we have stated very often is that the higher education institutions are responsible for quality in all academic activity. And in different ways, we never tried to do something in NOKUT that the institutions themselves are responsible to do. We are partly there to control, but also partly to stimulate, to make them aware of the responsibilities, and also to give them tools in order to do that actively. And through the process and also in everything we do, we try to have a very good relationship between universities and NOKUT, and see that we are not only there to do quality assurance, but quality assurance in the meaning that quality enhancement is a part of it. And because we did this policy document concerning the quality areas of study programs, we tried to make sure that we focus not so much on just on what they should do in their processes, but actually how they work in order to improve and to secure quality in the study programs. Another thing that was very important to make kind of way of talking positively about quality culture was the white paper that the government presented and made, where all the stakeholders were quite heavily involved, directly to the ministry to come up with ideas. How can we improve? What should be done differently? Are there anything making obstacles in the law, in the regulations? How should we use money in order to improve quality? And it's also right to say that this white paper was important to really focus on education and not only on research, which has been very much in the forefront. And then this white paper, both in making it and also afterwards, have really contributed heavily to making quality culture as something that is very important in the Norwegian society. I should probably also add here that NOKUT has up till now not been responsible for quality assurance, but also for the centers of excellence in education that some of the institutions in Norway have in different fields. And this has also stressed the fact that quality is not only something that should be made up to a threshold, but you should really try to look to the stars in order to improve study programs so that it can be really, really good. And then in order to create quality culture, also when it comes to involving stakeholders, transparency has been a very important word for us. We think that everything that is done from the institutions in the field of quality culture should also be public in a way that everyone else can look into what is going on in that institution. I think that may be the few things I will make time for in this short presentation. So I give the word back to the host. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Øystein. By now our audience is probably asking, why was the focus of your intervention on stakeholder involvement? And it'd be a good time for me to reveal that one of the issues that was discussed in this project and is also present in the report is the stakeholder involvement and collaboration to a large extent, and its importance for the quality culture and for quality assurance in general to make sense for all the actors. And another thing that we discuss and make recommendations about in the report is the role of quality assurance agencies in instigating the stakeholder collaboration, and also the role of quality assurance agencies in developing the external quality assurance framework, because there were a few cases where we've also seen that quality assurance agency feels like they are not driving the process, but it's other actors. And that's why we wanted to include one example of where the stakeholders can work together on this. One question, Øystein, from my side. You started your presentation with the issue of trust and trust towards the universities and autonomy of the universities, and that it has impacted how the system is designed in Norway. Do you think that in Norway you could have had this kind of a focus on quality culture and this kind of approach to quality assurance that you're now launching already 10 years ago, let's say? Or is it about the maturity of the systems? Whereas we do have some of in the audience who say that the systems and institutions can age without maturity, which I fully agree with. But do you think this kind of system would have been possible 10 years ago?
I think it is, yeah, all 20. I think it's been a development where you can see that this is easier to do at the moment. I think that there's not something that is only taking place in higher education. It's all part of the totality of the society, where trust is something that is there, but that's also in other parts of society. We see that trust is something that has been very important in the Norwegian society, but more and more also been balanced towards this thing around control. I think it could have been possible 10 years ago, but I think the way the institutions have been taking the responsibility of being their own quality assurance agency, you could say, has developed through the last 10 years. So now we can, with more confidence, give them more trust. I think that's maturing in a way. Okay.
One question for clarification from the audience. Did you say that you carry out the program reviews every 6 years, or?
Not program review, but the quality assurance, what I said, checking the quality assurance work in all institutions, do every 6 years. Yeah, that's the normal. It can be 8, can be 4, but 6 is the normal. Fine.
Okay. Thank you, Øystein. Unfortunately, we need to move on. Let's see if in the end we have more time for discussion. But for now, we'll move to another topic that is being discussed in the report, which is the institutional responsibility for quality assurance. There's been quite a lot of discussion about that in recent years, largely because the part 1 of the EST was changed quite a bit, and on the other hand also because we see different external institutional reviews and institutional assessments. I wonder if we can have Eltjo in the picture and in voice. So we could change the cameras. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can.
And we can hear you. This is great. Do we have your presentation as well? Yes. Okay. I give the floor to you now.
Okay. Thank you, Tia. Yes, I will say a couple of words on the institutional responsibility for quality assurance. First, it's good to show say a bit about the national framework in the Netherlands, which is basically program accreditation, not institutional. There is very slowly a shift visible towards institutional accreditation. This shift is really slow and careful. I'll come to that in a bit. There is, however, as in a way the first step of this shift, there is the possibility for institutions to have an institutional audit to have a limited program accreditation, where the program accreditation itself is limited to a couple of standards, mostly really on the content of the program itself. So, for instance, intended learning outcomes and realized learning outcomes as the most important ones. Other aspects that will be accredited or are accredited are then moved to this institutional audit, for instance, human resource management or other supporting elements. This shift, as I was saying, is being talked about from program accreditation to institutional accreditation. One of the things happening in the Netherlands at the moment is that there is an experiment where institutions were asked to participate in this for institutional accreditations. And in my institution, there were different reactions to this shift, which surprised me in a way a bit. The quality assurance department in general was positive. We would welcome this shift. We would welcome institutional accreditation. But the most surprising to me was that program management overall was negative about this. When we asked why exactly this was, because on first sight you would say that there is less tension on the programs, the main reaction was that the system as it is now is roughly working. They know how it works, what they have to do every 6 years, and basically they think that changing the system means that they have to rethink their processes, rethink their stance to what they're doing, and that is basically not in their interest. So the executive board is cautious, listening to the program management. So we did not participate in experiments. There are, however, changes in the internal quality assurance practices, not because of this shift towards institutional accreditation, but well, actually, this was because of more things happening at the same time. Like being said in the introduction, it is not only quality assurance that develops, but a lot of other things are developing as well. So, for instance, in our institution, we had a reorganization, which basically is leading to a stronger quality culture. The main focus or main goal, objective of this reorganization was not so much the quality culture itself, but it was supposedly, next to financial reasons, reasons of being able to react to external changes in a better way. But this reorganization led to more responsibility on lower levels. So the responsibility for the self-evaluation for the accreditation in the accreditation process is put down to the program team, to the teaching staff. No longer it is required that this self-evaluation is goes to the board, and the board had to put a positive, how you say that, agree with it. So now the responsibility is in the program team itself. One other thing, other development internally, is the internal audit like we had it. That was really a copy of the external accreditation process, but we decided to reform that, as well lose the term internal audit, so it's now the midterm review, as we call it. Less audit, more peer review, much more about enhancement than quality control. As well, this is by now no longer a process which is the same for all the programs, but basically it's context dependent. If some programs who function less than others, it might be more on the control side. Other which are more reflective or open, there it might be more on the peer review and more enhancement focused. And as a third example of a change in internal processes and practices around quality assurance is the way we process our institutional audit, like being said in the beginning. 6 years ago, that was very top-down. Someone in supporting staff was writing it, and it was basically a thing in for the higher management. This time, we're in the middle of the process of preparing for the institutional audit. We do it much more cooperative. We ask input for basically by all employees. So it's really a cooperative process of having this first self-evaluation and then the whole institutional audit. So all in all, these are, I think, 3 examples of changes in internal practices really going towards a stronger quality culture.
Thank you, Eltjo. Your example about the different perspectives within the institution as well, when you're considering whether to move to a different external educational system or not, when you're giving the opportunity, that because quite often we say that the institutions want one thing, but within the institution you have different perspectives to this kind of a change. And in particular that the program level was not necessarily so eager, even if I would assume that quite often program directors or however these the colleagues are being called in your institution, they probably do complain about the program accreditation as well. So is it now that you have the responsibility for the self-evaluation with them, that they do feel more ownership in the end of the day about this process?
Yeah, they do feel more ownership. There was one other thing I wanted to say, but I forgot that. But yes, they do definitely feel more ownership.
Okay. How is this done in practice? Just there was a question of clarification. So it's the program who organizes their own self-evaluation as they wish.
Well, there's a different process for program self-evaluation and this institutional self-evaluation. For the institutional self-evaluation, which is the big change in internal practice, what we do here is still the first draft is being written by supporting staff, but then we go to our employees, of course, as well to the official committees and stuff like that, and ask them what they think of it. But as well, what we did was we drafted randomly employees. So per building, we have a meeting with 20 random employees, and we give them a presentation of our current draft of the self-evaluation, and basically ask them what they think of it, if they recognize it, if it is their story as well, and of course, if they have nice extra examples, which makes it more lively.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I am painfully aware of the time flying quickly. So thank you, Eltjo, for your input, and we'll move to Christopher Bohlens, the student perspective, because we do need to have that also in the picture in order to complete it. Christopher?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, and we can hear you. And then if we get your presentation as well, that would be.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, we've asked you to talk about what kind of communication and information students would like to. A very challenging topic, but I hope you give it a try.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank you for the invitation. I will move a little bit fast forward regarding this topic. So first of all, I would like to say is that all these feedback that we gather into the EUA project was from the last meeting in February 2017. We meet as students there, as the student stakeholders in this project, and have some recommendation and even different topics that we have talked about. So first of all, I would like to say is that we have in the ESG the Capital 1.8, which is the public. The public has to be informed about the activities, the selection criteria, learning outcomes, and so on. But one of the key findings, which is in a recommendation here, is that the QA agency are even recommended to specify who their audience are, and both that the authors and the readers of the report are clear on the intended purpose and readership of this report. So that is this. That is the point. Would like a little bit to point out is that even the quality reports are not even those to compare against the publishing rankings and so on, or that they have a clear purpose on that thing. And with the reports, you cannot even reach everyone, because you cannot get everyone involved in it to have them into the detailed topic of that point, and not even the time and the intensive to go deep to the micro level on that. And even these reports are not the primary resource for students to decide on which universities they go or which institutions they go. And there has been a little discussion even about the publishing of reports. Some reports are not being published, or even at the negative decision of reports. So I also would like to point that is general a very good question: who is the audience in that point, and understandable for the beginners, and even to have a general overview about the QA systems and so on, and even make it possible to see what is the impact of that point. No? So the responsibility and the accessibility. So on the next slide, regarding the current situation, yeah, we have already talked about the accessibility, about the nationwide database. Was a discussion, the discussion about the negative decisions. Even I came to the second point, which was that we have a recommendation here in the report that the strategy of communication is not so clear. So the recommendation about it is that the institutions are recommended to have a clear strategy in place for communicating to the public about the activities and how they are quality assured, including addressing the expectation of the ESG Capital 1.8. I mean, this means more that the activities has to be published, and not even the qualities of these. And so there is a lack of a strategy, and even those need a strategy on that point. And yeah, that's the point. And I pointed out in some views of the student. They have to be in face of, know what the problems are, and even the students have to be enabled to participate to solve these problems, to make these to make it possible that they can make, and even the cooperations between the QA team and the students' representatives or unions are very important. But let me finally point out at my last slide is promoting quality assurance from student to student. Even that we have in the report is that the students have to be taking more an active role on explains of the aims and processes and results of the following student, yeah, because of the responsibility of the generation over students. And as you might see that the students are maybe only on the institutions or 2 or 3 years, and that's not a long time, yeah. And even that very important point is that the impact what we have achieved at the students is one point. As you can see, there has been measures and there has been procedures who have been changed, a lot of it. And even the last point is training and collaboration. And to make a little bit about quality assurance, to make it a little bit more sexy, yeah. And so we developed in Brussels at the meeting at last time, yeah, some nice ideas about slogans, yeah, quite awesome. QA matters, or without there's no quality. So the last point what I would like to talk is this is an important challenge to communicate how to deal with the internal communication with the reference of even the quality culture, and how to communicate with the public. Yeah, thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Christopher, for short but precise presentation where actually you nicely summarized some of the things that indeed do come up in the report about the need to communicate towards the students, but also the student participation. You're actually one of these students that are experts on quality assurance. You've been taking part in external quality assurance panels and so on. Would you have a reaction to the comment we have about the student participation being as important in terms of analyzing what is good and what is strong and what is weak in an institution, and also in following up on the external quality assurance reports, that we should not be focusing only on the in a way the quality assurance panel, that we need to have a student there, but what happens before and after. Has there been discussion among the student representatives about this?
Yeah, that's a strong discussion about it here. We have the ESGs, and even the ESG says that in every panel has to be in the student members, and then we have these students also in the committees. But overall, there are not in every country here in Europe students as the same partner involved as the other stakeholders, and that's a kind of a problem. And yeah, and so I personally, yeah, as a student, the student voice is also very important, what I can say, and they bring a new perspective and even another perspective into the quality assurance. And in the meantime, without us as students, there is no quality, yeah, because we are the students, yeah, we are not only the customers, yeah, we would also like to participate in these QA processes if we are allowed to do that, and if we train and teach each other under the students to enable it, yeah.
So your response would be that it's the students that and student representatives that should in a way train each other in these matters. What kind of role would you give to the institutions about it? Giving the students the ability to contribute to quality assurance.
The students are not the customers. Students are the same stakeholders as all, and this is very important to have these student representatives according to the policies, to have these in these committees and so on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. I think I am I come from a Nordic country where we are very precise about the time. And when we started this session, I said that I would take 1 hour of your time, dear participants and presenters, and I am extremely aware that we have now done that exactly. So if we can have all the speakers just to have a last view at them on the screen. I take the opportunity to thank you all very warmly. In Europe, where you are at the moment. We don't have time for panel discussion for the time being. However, consider this webinar just the beginning of a discussion about these matters. And it's not even a beginning, as Anna said in the beginning of this session. These matters are not completely, but we hope that we can continue the debate. There will certainly be other occasions, and actually I would go back to one issue that was touched upon during the session, which was the fact of what is the remit of QA, where are the limits as to what QA will be tackling, and the European Quality Assurance Forum, which will be organized in Vienna in November, will actually focus on this matter. So certainly the debate will continue, and we hope that some of you have been inspired to have a look at the report we've come up with, and will find something useful for your work as an inspiration about it. But for now, Øystein, Eltjo, Christopher, thank you for your participation and agreeing to do this session with us.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.